Welcome to today's episode of the Medical Device Marketing Podcast. So today we're going to be talking about the 7 things that could be preventing your website from converting. So today I'm joined by Becca and Jana. Welcome, Becca and Jana.
Hi. Thank you for having us.
So this is a really interesting topic. I know I say this every week, but I think it's because everything to do with medical device marketing is interesting. But the reason this is so important is because your medical device website really should be the hub of all your information and your best salesperson because it's available 24/7. So talking about how we can actually drive lead conversion or the issues that may be happening in order to prevent that could have a big impact straight away on your top line and your revenue and also your sales team performance, et cetera, et cetera. So let's start with number 1 of the 7. So Becca, I'm going to go to you for this one because we spoke about this in last week's podcast and I think it's fundamental to everything that we do when it comes to websites. This has to happen first. Becca, what is it?
Clear messaging. And, trying to build your website before you've got a clear messaging, you're going to find yourself doing iteration after iteration after iteration of your website because it's not going to be converting. You're not going to know why. Having clear messaging really helps once people land on your website to know what you do, how you help them, but also more importantly, how to get in contact with you and what the next steps are. So having a really clear message and story is vital before you start building a website. So I would say if you're listening to this thinking I'm going to build a website and you haven't got your messaging, I'd maybe pause this, go listen to messaging and then come back once you've done your messaging because that is definitely the order of importance. Having a pretty website with poor messaging is never going to work.
It's true, actually, and we do say that. You can have the most beautiful website. I think a lot of people put it on design. You can have a beautiful website and it's got bad copy. It will not convert. But you can have an ugly website with very good messaging and it will convert.
Yeah.
So that's the importance of having really good messaging. And we talk as well about the curse of knowledge. Can you briefly explain what that is? I know we spoke about it in last week's podcast, so just really briefly, because I think this is a really big thing that, again, can be improved very rapidly within MedTech.
Yes. So the curse of knowledge is essentially assuming that people know more than they do. And you know your device, your company better than anybody else's while you're writing your copy. So you will simplify it naturally, knowing that you need to. And often you simplify it to maybe a 4 or 5. But in reality, people make buying decisions at a level 1 or level 2 of knowledge. And we call that a gap in between the curse of knowledge. It's essentially assuming that your audience knows stuff about you or understand the jargon that you're putting in, when in reality they don't, because nobody knows your device and your company and your product as well as you do.
Keep it really, really simple.
Really simple.
And I think in marketing, it's really easy to fall into that trap of the curse of knowledge because, you can't look at your campaigns you can't take all the knowledge out of your head and look at your campaigns with like the fresh eyes of your prospects. So I think that's why it's so important that when you're approaching your messaging, you do it, take on the shoes of your ideal customer and see it from their point of view.
Yeah, and that's really difficult. And I think we spoke about it in the last podcast, but it's better to actually get somebody, doesn't even need to be external, but also it could be someone just not in your marketing team, just that maybe somebody in your finance team or somebody that maybe doesn't know the ins and outs of your product the same way that you do, and say to them, give them your campaign and say like, what questions, like how is this confusing? Because, you're right, you can't unknow the things that you know. But so that's why you've got to find other ways of really testing if you're doing the curse of knowledge.
So there was a really good tip you gave in the last podcast, but actually is more relevant to messaging. So how do you know if I'm going to look on a website now and we know that it takes people less than 10 seconds to decide whether the website is right for them or not, maybe even less, it's always getting shorter. So how can anybody who's listening to this podcast look at their website and say, yes, it's clear, or no, it isn't?
You should know, when someone lands on your website, they should know what you do, how you help them, and how they get it in the header. They should not have to scroll. If they do need to scroll, reality is they're just going to click the back button and go back to Google. So those 3 questions. So when you go onto your website and, pull it up now, have a look at it, can you answer those 3 questions without scrolling? And if the answer is no, you aren't simple enough. You're not clear enough. If people have to search for things, we're expecting way too much of them. They're just not going to do it.
It's super simple. So that is obviously super important. Simple messaging, not falling into the curse of knowledge. That's actually 1, combined into the 2. But the next thing that we see quite a lot is people talking about themselves too much on a website. How can we tell that, Jenna? And why is it so important not to do that? Because that's probably the biggest thing. Bad messaging we see, or unsimplified messaging is a big thing we see. But actually, this next thing is just as big that we see, and a really easy thing, probably the quickest thing to fix.
Yeah, so we see a lot of the time that companies will talk about themselves rather than talking to their customer. And they don't talk about themselves as a solution provider, rather they talk about, the benefits of their device, the features of their device, rather than what it actually can do for you. So I think, talking, we do this, rather than you'll get this. So a really easy way to judge how well you're doing at this is to look at how often you're using we are language versus you, your, and the ratio should be about every 7 you, your, you use 1 we are. Because that just means that you're really engaging your customer. You're talking to them. They know exactly what they're going to get out of working with you, rather than, lots of stuff that they might not care so much about, like your company history. We did this. Yes, that can be important, and there is a time and a place for that. But immediately when someone lands on your website, they want to know what they're going to get out of working with you. That's kind of what you want to be focusing on when it comes to developing your copy on your website.
I think a really interesting way anyone who's listening now can actually go and have a look at different websites. And if you look at our website, for example, because actually we do have the you, your very heavily. But if you look at other people's websites and they've got more of the we are, just feel how engaging the two different ones are, and you'll immediately see what we mean by it, which I think is really quite compelling when you do that. So yeah, excellent. So that's a really quick one that we see. Okay, so another quick one, actually it is a quick one. Becca, I'll come to you because again, this is one that can change everything really quickly. CTAs.
Calls to action are vital, and they need to all be the same. They need to be clear. And the reason that they all need to be the same is because your customer needs to know where they're going and what they're doing. So it needs to be things like book my 30-minute call or request my free sample. Really specific, clear call to action, so they know what they're getting. And they also need to stay the same, because if at the top of the page you're telling them to book a call, but then the bottom of the page you're telling them to request a sample, what do you actually want from them? And if they have to think about what you actually want, you're confusing them. So having one really clear call to action that goes throughout your website, and not just on your homepage, everywhere you need the same call to action, you're going to see a higher conversion rate. Something that I always think about, so constantly being asked to do things by companies, give our emails, and sort of, you're reluctant to press a button that you don't know what it's going to do for you. So the learn more button, for example, what does that mean?
Yeah, no.
What are you going to do?
See it everywhere.
What are you going to do with that? Like, is it a case that I'm just getting more information for free, or are you going to send me emails for the next 110 years? Like, what does learn more mean? Whereas book my 30-minute call, I know exactly what that means. I know that someone's calling me. I know that I'm only giving you 30 minutes of my time. I'm more likely to commit to that. So that's really important.
So that's sort of the next point we were coming on to, is to specificity. But coming back to the CTAs, how regularly should they be? And you said as well that they need to be the same. What do you mean by need to be the same? Because I think there's a couple of different things that need to be the same. So just so that everybody understands what we mean, who's listening.
The same in every way possible. So in the copy, they need to be the same. The size of the box needs to be the same. The color of the box, the color of the font. It's essentially a copy and paste your CTA button and paste it everywhere, because as soon as you change it, so for example, our brand colors are coral and purple, and our call to action button is coral. If we randomly change it to purple midway down, that people are going to think it's asking a different thing. Your brain is just going to see it as a different thing. And I haven't looked at our website probably in the last 2 or 3 days, but I know that my call to action button is coral. And it just, as soon as I see the coral, any piece of marketing that you send me, Jenna, I know it's going to be the book my call. Like, my brain's already associated that color, that size button with book my call. And that's, I know I look at our marketing more than people landing on a website, but essentially that's what you're doing. You're getting someone's brain to associate that button with book my call. So if it constantly changed color, you're losing that association.
So what about if I've got multiple buttons on my website? How do I manage that?
All right. So so if it's because you've got a secondary call to action, and what we mean by that is, if, say, for example, you're not ready to book a call, you need to do something else. Say, for example, you want to do a download. There's lots of different things you can do for a secondary call to action. They should be a different color because they are asking you for a different thing. So your main call to action button should be the same. Your secondary should be different, but then the secondary should all be the same of that thing. I'd also be reluctant to say you have one book my call or book a fruit main CTA button and then have 10 different secondaries. I think that's not a good idea. Called secondary because there's only 2. I think that's important to think about. I think I go on websites and it's like book my call, or I keep using that one as an example. It's the main call to action, and that could be everywhere. But then so is learn more about us here, download this here, request a sample. It's too much.
I think the important thing to think about, though, for people who are listening, is when we talk about primary calls to action and secondary call to action, it's what is the reason for each of those. The primary call is because that's what you want somebody to do. But actually the secondary call is because they might not be ready to do that one thing yet. So you want to keep engagement with them. And ideally you want their email, you want some way to continue speaking.
The other thing I was going to say about your primary CTA is that a lot of companies do it really well. They have it at the top of the page or maybe at the bottom of the page. But not a lot of companies are doing it throughout your page. The thing is, you don't know when your user is going to be ready to take that next step. You don't know when they've reached that piece of information that's going to lead them into making their decision. So that's why you need to have your CTA peppered throughout all of your pages, so that when they are ready, it's really easy to find. They don't have to go searching for it, because like you said earlier, as soon as you have to go searching for it, then they're going to click away, go somewhere else. It's easier, basically.
We often get pushback on that as well. Like often when they see the call to action button essentially nearly in every section, they're like, this is too much. Like it's really obvious that they need to do it was obvious to you because you know what the next step is. Whereas going back to the curse of knowledge, it's not potentially for them. So having that, button everywhere is really important. And if you think, I got a comment once, but doesn't it look like we're sort of spamming them or anything? It's like, it looks like you're spamming them, then you're not giving them a good call to action. If it's a really, and we'll get onto it, precise and clear call to action. You can put it as many times, pepper it as many times throughout your website, and it won't feel like a call me. Whereas if you're not doing it right, then that can happen. But it's about doing the right CTA.
I think we've probably been in that situation ourselves, though. I think we probably felt, because now we have calls to action all the way through our site, and it's totally normal to us. And we put it through everybody else's sites, and it's totally normal because of the impact it has on conversion. But I think probably when we first decided to do that, we were like, no, it's too pushy. We probably felt the same way. But actually now that it's so normal to us, we wouldn't have it any other way. And actually we see it really crazy if you don't have calls to action.
Yeah.
So I think it's all about getting used to it, isn't it? And understanding what the outcome of it that you can deliver. Okay. So we've spoken about calls to action, simple messaging, calls to action throughout your site. What is the next really important thing? And actually, Becca, you always say this is the most important thing when it comes to converting people. So a clear pathway to what you want them to do.
Yes. And
what does that look like?
Having a plan. I think websites that don't have a plan struggle in quite a big way. And what I mean by a plan is there's 2 ways you can do it. You can either do the entire way that they're going to work with you. So, it's book a call, or request a sample, use your sample by 30 days. Like that's the entire process of working with us. Or it's just a plan of the next step. So for us, for example, it's book my 30-minute call. A member of our marketing team will get in contact with you. We then give you a proposal. A very clear plan of action, what's happening. And whether you go for the plan of action for the immediate meeting or the entire life cycle of working with your customer really depends on your kind of product and what works best for them. But either way, you need one or the other. And quite regularly I hear from when we talk about plans, people will say, oh, well, we have 7 steps of working with us. And that's fair enough. There probably is a lot of steps, but it's important for that initial contact. What does that look like? Because going back to what we said earlier, people are really busy. They don't know how you're going to use their data or their information. And it just gives people that trust in you that, okay, I know what's happening next. I know we're building this relationship of trust. And I think that's really important.
But it comes back down to everything we always say, which is like answering the issues, fears and concerns. And by giving somebody a plan, you're answering that issue, fear and concern about what's happening next, which is removing the inertia, which is allowing them to move forward. So it makes total sense that has a really big impact on your website. So one other thing actually we haven't spoken about and isn't in our list, but I think is quite an interesting thing, maybe we'll bring it up at the end, is that plan, although it's often written out, is also great in a video form, because it really helps people to move through what's happening as well, both potentially so people know what the next steps are. Okay, so Jenna, I'm going to go to you next because this is really your field. So what's the next thing that will stop your conversions? So obviously we've got desktop and we've got mobile optimization. Mobile optimization is one of the things that is sometimes neglected. I wouldn't say it's neglected too much, but I think it's really worth checking. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I think let's talk about more of the technical stuff. We talked about the messaging and that sort of thing. But so I think most companies do mobile well nowadays, and it's not so much of a problem as it was. But those companies or those websites that are not necessarily optimized for mobile are really missing out on like a lot of traffic and a lot of conversions, because it's infuriating if you are trying to look for something on your phone and you go onto the website and it just doesn't work.
I suppose the question is, if you go onto somebody, so if anybody is listening to this, then things, right? So if you go onto a mobile website and it doesn't work, what do? You
just click away.
Yeah, you don't exactly go, let me go and wait and look at the desktop.
Never.
You lose that person straight away. So that's where the importance lies.
And I think it's worth talking about, what does bad mobile optimization look like? Well, it's when it doesn't load very well because it's not coded correctly for mobile. It's when, the navigation is poor, it doesn't really work. It's, when you have massive chunks of copy that just take up the whole screen and you're scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, it just doesn't look good.
You can't press the buttons.
Yeah. Buttons are too small or too, just not working.
Well, the font is huge.
Yeah.
That always, I feel like I'm being shouted at. You go on your mobile and the font's like size 30s.
Yeah.
Stresses me out every time.
Yeah. And images are too big for the screen, It's just, it looks poor. It looks unprofessional. So I think, take a look at your mobile traffic. I think pretty much most companies will see it's about 50-50. If it's more, if you're leaning more towards mobile, you need to approach your website design with a mobile first approach. So design everything for mobile. But if it's 50-50, then, you want to be doing them in that ratio. You want to be making sure that you are checking everything on mobile. Most CMS systems allow you to look at mobile.
It's interesting. They do. So we find this with the websites that we develop. You always have to. So I think the assumption is that actually, when you build a website, it automatically converts into mobile quite effectively. That is really not the case.
Yeah.
You have to do an awful lot of checking on mobile. So make sure you don't assume that it will just naturally move. Really go and try it. And if you see one page isn't converting very well, go and see what the user journey is, because you'll probably find there's some reason why that's happening.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, even though some CMS systems do show you what it looks like on mobile, you need to actually check for yourself. Yeah. And there are different mobile sizes as well. So you need to be trying to check on as many screens as you can.
But that's also the case for like desktops and screens. And, you're looking at it on your beautiful, large, big monitor, and then you drag it to your laptop and you're like, oh.
Yeah. And iPad.
Very pretty.
No, it doesn't. It goes to iPad, exactly. It's all different screen sizes.
You need to make sure that it's responsive and talk to your developer or your web agency to make sure that it does respond to every screen size, and nobody's going to be frustrated, because that can be frustrating. And
also, you've put all this work in. So you've done your messaging, you've got your CTAs in the right place, you've got specific CTAs, you've got, of course, a really good plan of how your audience are going to move through. And then suddenly your website isn't optimized correctly, and you lose, not only do you lose people when they actually get on your website, but that then affects your SEO, which affects people coming to your website as well. So it all needs to be thought about when you're talking about conversions.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Definitely. Which brings me on very neatly to the last topic so we've managed to optimize everything on the website. So when somebody's there, they're going to move through it. It's optimized, everything interacts beautifully, regardless of what platform you're on. But now it's about, how do we get people to the website? And actually, we do an awful lot of this on our website. And it's huge because, if you can increase your traffic by 50, 100, 200, 300% through really excellent SEO practices, which you can do. even thousands of percent, how much more traffic then comes through that whole system. So how do we do that, Jenna? Like, what are the things that people should think about? Because often companies or people who are listening will probably have web development companies. So this isn't like they'll go into their website themselves. Sometimes they might do, sometimes they're not. But what are the quick wins that we can give people to go and have a look at and say, actually, I need to change this?
Yeah, so I mean, there are about 200 plus factors that affect your
So we just have the top 3.
if you can. So some of the quickest fixes, if you use there are loads of free tools out there that will audit your website, the health of your website. So SEMrush, Screaming Frog, there are loads of, if you just type in free SEO checker, you can find one. And one of the main things that they'll pick up for you is broken links. And that's a really quick, really easy fix. But also if it's not working, it's really infuriating for your users. And that is how you instantly lose traffic and you get a really high bounce rate. And then less traffic ends up coming to your website.
So if somebody did go onto SEMrush today or any of the other tools, as there are lots of them, and found they did have a lot of broken links, they would just send them to their web developer and then they would be able to update them?
Yeah, I mean, you could do that. Or you could ask your web developer to show you how to easily fix these links yourself, because it's not, it should be pretty easy to do. But broken links are just things like if you have redirected any URLs because you've created new pages or you've deleted old pages, and you haven't redirected them correctly or you've forgotten to redirect them. Sometimes your external links, when you're linking out to other websites, they might have moved things around and then you have to go and update that link. So it's just those things like that you might not necessarily be able to spot yourself without, physically. Either you have to go through and check every link on your website or you get, a free tool to do it for you. That's a super quick fix and that is massively important.
What about, Becca, do you have anything to add to that before I jump onto the next thing?
No, I would just say that you'd be surprised how links break, things like social media links at the bottom. You might change your Instagram handle or just something really simple and you're not thought about it, that actually in your footer of your website is normally your icons.
Yeah.
So it's things like that catch you out and you're never going to remember, and having that link of list is really important.
Yeah, and they happen more often than you'd think.
Yes.
I'm doing weekly checks to make sure this hasn't happened, and it happens quite a lot, and then you have to go in and fix them, but it's fine. It doesn't take long to fix them. It's just you have to keep an eye on it.
What about keywords? Because keywords is a really quick winner for people who aren't using them correctly at the moment.
So, I mean, there's 2 ways you can go about keywords. You can either start creating content specifically for keywords based on your keyword research. Again, there's loads of tools out there to help you with your keyword research. Or you can, there's an easier, or not an easier, but a quick fix kind of way to do it is looking at your current pages. What was their ranking for? I'd recommend Google Search Console for this. It's free. You just need to add some code to your website and it will start tracking all that for you. But it will show you what people are typing into search engines that your website is coming up as a result for. And you can take a look at that data. You can see how many impressions you've got and where you're currently ranking. Anything that you're ranking above about 15 for, that's going to be really easy for you to go in, just update a bit, add in some more of those keywords, the word that people are searching for that you're coming up as. And you should see yourself skyrocket because you're already at 15. It's a lot easier to go from 15 to number 1, 500.
And you can just
50.
do that on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
So you can do that bi-weekly, monthly, something like that, and it'd have a significant impact.
Yeah, it's definitely an ongoing process. And there are other things you can do to update these pages, like fixing broken links, for example, or adding in links to other internal pages or external pages, updating statistics. Images, all those sorts of things.
Alt tags.
Yes.
It was actually interesting. So I think there's so much you can do on SEO, but those really are some great quick wins.
Yeah.
So the correcting the links and then writing the right keywords in, but also having them in your title tags and meta descriptions. So that's obviously what you see when you're on Google. And if you put your keywords right at the front, the key ones you're after, they're much more likely to rank really well. So that makes a huge difference. Okay, so we've talked about 7 different things that people can do straight away, and they're things that will really make a huge impact straight away. So I really recommend people go and do it. If I had to ask each of you, what's the one thing that you think will make the biggest impact to their website straight away, what would it be? Jenna, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I get to go first. I would say changing your copy to be more your. I think that has a massive effect, and it's so much more engaging for your readers, your readers, your website visitors, your potential customers. So that would be go through and check your ratio of your we are. It's a quick fix potentially. I mean, it could be a whole messaging redo, but it is one way to start doing that.
Mine would be adding all those call to actions and really thinking about where you want people to go, where you want that secondary call to action to go, and what that plan is, because I think those two things do go hand in hand. Because something that we haven't actually said in this podcast, which I'm surprised by, is that if you've got a lovely website, but it's a bit of a brick wall, it doesn't take anybody anywhere, it's a waste. You've wasted all your time and your effort getting them there. So making sure that there's a next step for getting them from a user of your website to somebody that you're actually talking to is really important, or you're getting their email address. That next step, I would say, is my tip.
Interesting. We haven't spoken about the brick wall at all, but you're absolutely right. That's the one thing we always say. There's no point, because actually, if your website isn't optimized for conversion, then you can do all the external marketing things you want, and you are pushing them directly into a brick wall. So, I mean, that must be my one thing. Don't push your audience into a brick wall. Like, organize your messaging.
The other thing that I think is important as well, and I know we might think we're saying this because we're an agency, but it's actually really important, is to constantly be looking at your website and updating your website, because it's not a brochure, it's not a static printed item. It needs to be constantly changing, because otherwise it's going to get stale. Google isn't going to think it's got anything relevant anymore. It's just, your website is something that's an ongoing marketing activity. It's not a one and done, let's touch it again in 5 years. And I think that happens so regularly in medical device. And then we end up having, you have bigger conversations about completely rebranding it, completely redoing your messaging, and then it becomes a really big project. But actually, if you were looking after your website, like you were saying earlier, every week, checking for broken links and, just regularly touching in and checking the data and looking at your website doesn't have to be a complete redo every single time. It can just be minor tweaks here and there to really get it converted.
And off data. That's the important thing.
That's the really important.
Because actually, if you just put one website out and then leave it and then come and say, I'm going to do another website, you've got no data to actually say what's working and what's not. But actually, as we do, we look at the data all the time. I mean, to give people an idea of how much sort of a website is updated, I would say we probably add 1 to 2 pages to our website a week. And we're constantly updating the keywords and SEO on it. So there's a significant amount of updates that happen.
And I think that it's important to do that, because it's all about listening to your customers. And when we say listening in this sense, it's about, we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, Jenna, where you came to me and said, our About page isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing. And we had a really great chat about why was it not. And a couple of weeks later, we had a new About Us page. And in 2 or 3 weeks' time, we'll be chatting about if those changes have done what we thought they were going to do, because, you have the data, something's not working, and then it's about tweaking different elements on the page to see if that was a thing that wasn't working. And it might not be that you get it right the first time. It might need to be tweaked second or a third time, but you have the data to see that. And I think that's something that's really important. It's constantly looking at it. Things like, is it Hotjar?
Hotjar, I was going to say. Hotjar's great for that. You can look at exactly where people are clicking on your page, how far they're scrolling down. You can see everything with Hotjar. It's great for looking at engagement.
Yeah, I think it's that. So maybe I would have a double whammy for my key thing. It's making sure you have that user journey through your website with your call to actions, but then also constantly looking at the data to make sure that your website is doing what you want it to do, because otherwise
and it has to convert. There's no point in having a website if it's not converting. It doesn't make sense.
So it's a digital sales rep, but it needs to be doing its job.
Fantastic. So thank you very much for watching today's episode of the Medical Device Marketing Podcast. We hope you enjoyed what you heard. We look forward to seeing you next week. This episode of the Medical Device Marketing Podcast was brought to you by Podymos. If this conversation sparked any new ideas for you, or you want to transform your medical device marketing approach, then our door is always open. Visit www.podymos.com and explore a treasure trove of information about medical device marketing on our Learning Centre. Or, better yet, get in contact with us and speak to one of our expert marketers, as they're as passionate about medical device innovation as you are.